Now, we've talked about this briefly, part of this briefly in the past, earlier in the class. Physiology versus ecology for maximum growth. So here we have a relationship between C3 plants. Again, these are the more common species of plants that we're familiar with. Elm trees, dogwood trees, the nice soft green grass that appears in the spring, compared to C4 plants that would include things like corn and the crabgrass that takes over once summer hits here. So in the spring, lower temperatures, soil's wet, the C3 grasses take off. When the temperatures begin to rise, the soil dries out. C4 plants become more competitive. They're more drought and heat resistant than C3 plants. And there's a physiological reason for that we won't get into really in this class. Now the photosynthetic rate, this is something we've looked at before, is here relative to the CO2 concentration in parts per million. Right now we're sitting at about 420, 425 parts per million CO2, so you're right about here. And at that high concentration of CO2, C4 plants are more competitive. They have a greater water use efficiency, it's called. However, if the temperatures are lower, C3 plants are going to be more competitive. But the world is shifting towards warmer and drier. So that means ultimately C4 plants are going to potentially expand in their aerial coverage of the earth. So we may see a rise in the C4 communities. Species interactions. Primary producers such as algae and leafy green plants like clover, grasses, trees are consumed by primary consumers. In the case of algae, they'd be consumed by zooplankton. In the case of clovers and trees, rodents may be the consumers. These in turn can be consumed by secondary consumers such as fish eating the zooplankton, a sockeye salmon eating a daphnia, which has been feeding on algae, or a hawk, which is eating a prairie dog, which has been feeding on clover. And then the decomposers can come in, the bacteria and the fungi, and the detritus feeders are going to consume little bits and pieces of organic matter that other organisms discard. So the decomposers are going to be the batting cleanup in this particular ecosystem. An ecotone is a diffuse boundary between ecosystems. An ecotone may contain an assemblage of species that is not found in either adjacent ecosystem. So here we have a terrestrial ecosystem. This might be, say, the area next to the medical building, the children's hospital, where we see lots of ground squirrels. If you go down the hill by the parking deck, we have a transitional ecosystem. We go from this terrestrial ecosystem to this transitional ecosystem, and I haven't seen any turtles there. But there are ducks, and there's a beaver pond there right on campus. And this beaver pond is not quite a healthy environment like this. It's pretty funky looking, actually. But let's say it's a nice, clean beaver pond. We would have a variety of fish species living in this aquatic ecosystem. We would have reptiles and amphibians, as well as waterfowl living in the transitional ecosystem. And then up the hill a little bit more towards the geology department, we have the terrestrial ecosystem dominated by ground squirrels and magpies. So what this means is the transitional ecosystem may have species that are not common in either of these adjacent ecosystems. This tiny band around this pond is going to be very different from the pond itself or the terrestrial ecosystem that are nearby, certainly within walking distance, very short walking distance. Well, it's less than the width of a basketball court. Major terrestrial biomes are depicted in this map. Start out over here on the left, tropical forests. Tropical forests are going to be found in the tropics. Boreal forests are going to be found at the higher latitudes. So tropical forests here in the Americas, boreal forest up here in the Americas. It's going to be either high latitude or high altitude. Either way, cold. Savannas are going to be found where there's seasonal precipitation. Tundra is going to be found where it's relatively cold. And we'll take a look at all these in a second. Starting with the polar biome. The polar biome is characterized by very low temperatures throughout the year with permanent presence of snow and ice. It doesn't mean snow and ice everywhere. It just means it is present in a significant amount throughout the year. This eliminates the possibility of significant terrestrial vegetation, although microscopic algae known as cryovegetation can develop on the ice or snow. This lack of terrestrial producers results in a very low diversity in polar biomes. Here we can see polar bear, looks like about a 3-year-old, eating a seal. These are ivory gulls that follow these bears because they know they have a better chance of getting a snack if they follow one of these guys than just by hoping for the best, hovering around this pancake sea ice in the background here. Now, when you work in these environments, like I did a few years ago, I traveled up north with the National Geographic crowd, and one of my jobs, in addition to being a scientist explaining what we're seeing, is as a bodyguard. So every morning at 5:15 a.m. or so, I'd get an annoying buzzing sound in my room, which was about this size that you see here. And I'd load up my rifle. This is a stainless steel 30-06 and a flare gun here. And then I'd go to what's called the Orca room, and there was a boat hanging about 30 feet above the Arctic Ocean. I would jump out of that door into the boat with these 2 guns, lower the boat, cruise around to the other side, and pick up some of the guests, the tourists, and take them on shore. It's a really exciting way to start the day. Jumping out of the 3rd floor of a boat into a moving boat hanging on a rope with a couple guns. So this is the area we were exploring that we'll show you in the next, or I'll show you in the next few images. This is Svalbard, the Svalbard archipelago. It's located here in the North Atlantic. This is about 82 degrees north latitude, so the North Pole is just a little bit further to the north here. You can see we're well north of northern Norway. This is actually sort of owned by Norway or administrated by Norway, and it's famous for its polar bear population. This is my first polar bear encounter. You can see there's a large glacier calving into the North Atlantic here, and the polar bear is working its way along the chunks of ice that have fallen off this face looking for seals. Here's a polar bear going for it. This is, again, probably about a 3-year-old, most likely a male in this image. And again here, one of the interesting things about polar bears you may not know is their skin is actually black and their fur is clear, and it's also hollow. So when you buy one of those fancy sleeping bags with hollow fill, or whatever they call it now, they're actually plastic tubes that mimic polar bear hair. So when the polar bear is wet, you can see through this clear hair to its skin. You can see the bear is actually dark colored. So this would be kind of like a solar cell, more like a solar vacuum heating tube that allows the bears to maybe get some warmth from the sun, even at those latitudes. This is a male bear jumping a lead. They are really, really good at doing this. They have no problem being in cold water, but they will stay dry if possible. So a couple images of the bear jumping, wasting as little energy as possible. And you see lots of that. If you go up there. This is when they come out of the water, they roll around in the snow to dry off. This is the bear kind of lounging and drying off here. And one of my favorite photos that isn't one of my best photos, but it just happened to be timed well. Lucky. And this was a bear that got so close that I could not back off the lens at all. So this was as far away as I can get the bear in the lens I was using at the time. Now these bears don't have any predators themselves, so they're not afraid of anything. Meaning they're not afraid of you, they're not afraid of jeeps or boats. This bear actually came up to our boat and put its paws right on it and looked up at us like, I hope one of you fall off. Now on the opposite end of the world, These are Adelie penguins on Seymour Island, a little island in the Antarctic Peninsula. They commonly produce 2 chicks per year. This is a male or a female. You can't tell unless you turn them upside down and look inside them, basically. So we don't know. They look identical. This is definitely a male by its behavior. So this is a bachelor male who doesn't have a mate, so he's causing a disturbance in the rookery. Hey, look at me, kind of thing. And a close-up of the chicks here. So if this penguin pair is lucky, they will raise both of these to the creche stage, and then the chicks hang out together on the shore while the parents are feeding. That gives the parents a bit of a relief. And the chicks are less likely to be eaten by skuas, the giant brown seabirds that live off of these chicks. Just some action shots of these guys. They're pretty athletic. They're really, really tough. It's like a 30-pound muscle with a nail on the end of it. 30 pounds of muscle with a hammer on the end. It's like one of these. This is Mike Polito, one of the grad students I was working with. He's cataloging a seabird. It's in this bag here that he found dead for introduction to the museum in North Carolina. Penguins are very curious. They're not afraid of anything on land, so they will gather around you just to see what you're doing. And this is a gentoo penguin, different species. This is a blue-eyed shag, bird that lives in the same environments but is not a penguin. It looks like a penguin from a distance. This is my least favorite species of penguin for stinkiness. They're the stinkiest, sloppiest species of brushy-tailed penguin. Chin straps are the champion climbers. The Adelies are a little bit in between. They're not incredible climbers, and they don't generate this slimy, stinky mess that the gentoos generate. This is after a snowstorm. They stay on the nest in spite of the weather. There's a couple eggs or chicks underneath this penguin at this time. This is John, one of our crew members, trying to keep warm. I almost stepped on his head. I didn't know he was there until I saw the snow move a little bit. And just taking a census of penguins. This is a historic Antarctic research hut down here. These are now preserved, and there's a group out of England that's been restoring them, preserving all of the scientific equipment and personal belongings that are left behind in these things pretty commonly. So these are Adelie penguins, and you can see some of the guests, the tourists here. We kept them as far away from the birds as we could, so we were the only ones allowed to approach and interact with them. And we try not to disturb them to whatever degree we can avoid that. This is Christmas morning, a bunch of Adelie diving into the water. Once one falls in and is not eaten by a leopard seal, which you saw on the first slide today, the others believe it's safe, and then they pile in there by the hundreds or thousands. This is what they're trying to avoid. This is a leopard seal that, again, you saw in the first image, going after a dead gentoo penguin. They lounge on the ice while they're digesting their penguin breakfast, and then they slip back into the water and spend the rest of the day eating more penguins. This is a mountain of blue-eyed shags here. These feed on pretty much the same thing as the Adelie penguins here, but these birds, unlike the penguins, are principally flyers rather than swimmers and divers. They do dive into the water, but they don't dive that far. And this is the end of the line. This is as far south as we got before the icebreaker got stuck and we had to back up. So at this point, we're backing up from Antarctica here. You can see in the background. Well, it's all around us. So mountains, volcanoes, everything off in the distance here. This is Paulette Island. This was Christmas morning. This is melting snow and ice with greasy, fishy bird poop all over it. This is remarkably slippery. So Merry Christmas to me. I fell in that stuff first thing in the morning, and for the rest of the day people were saying, hey, there's stuff all over your back. And yeah, it's penguin poop. So I made a poop angel in the snow. For the rest of the day people were pointing at the snow and saying, is that a body up there? No, it's poop the same size and shape. And here's a view from atop the cliff on the island looking down at the penguin rookery. So you see these little bodies of nests that are on relative high points, so kind of slimy, sloppy water between. They go to the high point, collect rocks, build their nests, and these can build up over time to pretty considerable size of hundreds of thousands. In some cases, 700,000 individual penguins may occupy a rookery like this. And another image here and here. They're doing what's called tobogganing, where they drop down on their belly and they push with their hind feet up the hill and down the hill. So there's some heading out to sea and heading back up the hill to their nest. And a picture of some minke whales and some southern sea lions. This is a Weddell seal. Now we're going to go back up north again. This is Iceland, and the reason we're going up north is to take a look at what's growing here. This is Vestfjordur, the Westfjord region of Iceland, and we're going to be up here at the Draknjökull, and we're looking at cryovegetation. This is algae that lives in the snow and on ice. So this bloody looking pinkish stuff here is not blood, it's algae. Algae living in the snow, cryovegetation, so ice vegetation. Here in Greenland, this is East Greenland in the summertime in August. You can see glaciers calving into the North Atlantic from all sides of this bay. There's a very limited ecosystem in Iceland, terrestrial ecosystem. Here we see some willow trees. This is about as big as they get in the Midlands of Iceland. This is, for scale, my foot would be longer than this tree is tall. This tree is probably about 20 years old, I'm guessing. These trees are growing next to volcanic vents, so there's hot air coming out of the ground here, and that explains the large size of the trees. This is the Svalbard archipelago. This is an island called Gjója, and Gjója is an example of a tundra biome. These develop in regions where the mean annual temperature is low, but where a short summer season permits development of terrestrial vegetation. In this case, we have some flowers, tiny, tiny willow trees and alders on occasion, but you don't see any in this image. So very, very sparse vegetation, but it is here, it does appear every year, and there are some animals. There are rodents and Arctic foxes that live on this island, and not too many bears. This is the Geographic Explorer. This island in the background here is Björnøya, which means Bear Island. This is Ian Walker getting his Zodiac ready to go. This is the process of lowering these things into the ocean. So I was talking a few minutes ago about jumping out of a window. You would jump out of one of these ports, which actually be here, into this boat, which is swinging back and forth, and kind of hope for the best when you have all your gear on. You don't fall into the ocean where you'd sink like a stone. The only organisms we saw running around here were Arctic foxes, and my boat saw them in the morning and in the afternoon, and that was it. Nobody else saw anything. So fairly limited terrestrial ecosystem here. Limestone Lake in Saskatchewan. This is on the border of Saskatchewan and Manitoba near Flin Flon or Creighton, all that same area. This is a boreal forest in North America. It's known as a taiga in Asia, Siberia principally. These are going to form where winters are long and cold, and the growing season is long enough to eliminate permafrost. Extensive conifer-dominated forests are going to develop. Saskatchewan, we have black spruce as one of the primary trees up north. These landscapes tend to be flat, and they're flat because glacial activity has scraped large ice sheets back and forth over this surface many, many times. As a result of this glacial activity, there are low points that fill in with water, forming ponds. So those ponds become choked with vegetation, become bogs. If the ponds are big enough, they remain as lakes for quite some time. Lakes can also be generated by beavers, like they do here on campus. They're one of the major landscape modifiers at the high latitudes. So beavers are very important, not just for themselves, but for ecosystem. That's another example here. This is Gravel Lake in the Northwest Territories. This is a lake that we found back on a bike trip in 2008 with plans to core it. We never went back to core this lake. But it's there, and you could get probably a good 10,000-year climate record out of it. This is a cold desert biome. These cold desert biomes are dominated most commonly by dry adapted shrubs. And one dry adapted shrub that we're all familiar with is sagebrush. And this sagebrush, you can see here, again, is going to be drought tolerant. I don't know how long these live. I suspect many, many decades. Also rabbit bush, which is going to be a more green rather than bluish looking shrub in this image. And we'll see some grasses and seasonal herbaceous dicots. It refers to early leaf formation. This is a short grass prairie biome along the eastern front of the Rocky Mountains. This picture was taken in South Dakota a couple years ago as the sun was going down. So unfortunately you can't see the deep green, lush green grasses here of the short grass prairie biome. 150 years ago, this would have been covered with bison, and now it's mostly covered with cattle. Hey, here's some bison. So short grass prairie biomes, again, the closest ones are going to appear along the eastern front of the Rocky Mountains in the Dakotas here in the U.S., Colorado. In Canada, it would be Alberta. Best examples of these types of biomes and these animals that have evolved to consume these plants. Why these animals are shaped like this. There's a similar relationship in the Himalayas. These are some yak that we saw along our Tibetan adventure in the Himalayas a few years back. You'll notice the yaks are very similar looking to bison. And these are essentially wild, semi-wild cows. Temperate deciduous forest biomes are dominated by trees that drop their leaves. It's deciduous part of this definition. Leaves fall off during the winter. These temperate deciduous forests cover much of the United States east of the Mississippi River. Essentially from the Mississippi east and to the north through Quebec and southern Quebec anyway, on southern Ontario, all over. This particular photo was taken in North Carolina, Great Smoky Mountains. Called Smoky Mountains because they look smoky. A lot of this unfortunately had burned down a few years ago. Not this particular series of ridges, but over here, like Gatlinburg, burned down a couple years ago. Tropical rainforest biome. And this is going to form where rainfall is common throughout the year. This particular image was taken in northern Venezuela. You can see a bowerbird nest here. And here's another one looking down from the highlands towards the lowlands. And at this time, this was about 2:30 in the afternoon, the howler monkeys would have been active. They start at 5:30 in the morning. They go off again at 10:30, 2:30, and 5:30 in the afternoon. And they're really loud. It's actually one of my favorite things about going to the jungle is hearing things screaming in the trees. These things are about the size of a kind of a mid-sized poodle, but really loud. That's a poodle that can really scream. This is the Kalaupapa Peninsula of Hawaii on the island of Molokai. This is a lava field. This lava poured out of this island when it broke in half. The island split in two, and the north half of the island fell into the Pacific Ocean, probably, almost certainly causing an enormous tsunami that destroyed the Pacific Rim thousands and thousands of miles to the north and west of here. But we're going here to look at the biome. This is from the Kalaupapa Peninsula itself, that flat place I just showed you. And if you watched, I think it's Jurassic Park 3, it starts out with a helicopter flying through this valley here to give you the prehistoric feel. This is the valley the helicopter flew through. And these are just some images of this biome. This is a tropical deciduous forest biome in northern Australia. This is in the Northern Territories of Australia. Probably maybe 6 to 10 hours east of Kakadu, one of the famous national parks. These are going to form in rainy areas that have a distinct dry season. This particular season is known as the Yaka by the Aboriginals, and that kind of means smoky. are steamy for the vapor rising off of these bodies of water. This is a billabong. It is full of very, very large crocodiles, so you do not go swimming in the billabong. I would not go swimming in the billabong. This is in Kakadu, so you can see that this area gets flooded every year. This is underwater. This flat space here is completely underwater. You can see what it does to the plants surrounding it. Then there's a 6-month dry season where it dries up completely and this water goes away. As we mentioned during the atmosphere and ocean circulation portion of the class, this is an area that would be controlled by El Nino, La Nina. There could be multi-year increases in precipitation or decreases in precipitation related to ENSO. And we've just seen in Australia the last year an example of extreme drought and the wildfires that killed an estimated 1.5 billion animals in regions like this.